Hello and welcome to this wide briefing on generative AI. Drive impact, not hype. What business leaders must know about Gen AI. I'm Amit Katwala, I'm an editor and writer at Wired, and I'm here at the Thoughtworks office for this virtual briefing. Generative AI has been all over the news in the last year, with platforms like ChatGPT and Midjourney attracting hundreds of millions of users and drawing attention to a range of applications from text to images to video. But what does Gen AI mean for businesses, and how can they see through the hype to drive real impact? Joining me to discuss are Emily Gorcenski, Head of Data and AI at Thoughtworks Germany, and Barton Friedland, Principal Advisory Consultant at Thoughtworks. Thank you both so much for joining us. So let's kick off with an easy question, maybe for you first, Emily. What exactly is Gen AI? How does it differ from what we've seen in the past?
Sure. I think generative AI, or Gen AI, is simply a class of algorithms that's mostly used for creating outputs that we normally think of as sort of free-form or human outputs, right? So things like text communications or images, but it's not limited to sort of artistic or creative outputs. We can also use it to do things like generate a new recipe for a food product or a new chemical compound or a drug, for example. And I think that you ask about what's new about generative AI, and the thing is that it's actually been around for a long time. We've been seeing generative AI being used in applications for everywhere from drug development to generating articles about sports stories for a number of years. The only thing that's really new about it today is that the solutions are no longer point solutions, right? There's no longer a specific algorithm that's made to solve a specific problem. We now have products that are more sort of general purpose. So when we talk about things like ChatGPT or Midjourney, there's a whole range of applications for those products, and you don't need a special set of skills to be able to use them sort of out of the box. So I think what's new about it is not that it's a new technology per se, it's that it's become productized and that the barrier to entry is much lower.
That point about barrier to entry, Barton, is a really interesting one, isn't it?
Yeah, I think so, because it's really about enabling people to do something different. That's what's different. If you go back to before graphic user interfaces existed, you could use a computer, but you'd have to learn a lot of arcane language. And now we kind of point and click our way through our lives, and we don't really think about it too much. So I think this momentum that Emily is speaking about gives a new capability to humans. We can now interact with a non-human in a way that actually feels incredibly natural.
One of the things we've seen around AI, basically ever since it was invented, was a lot of hype, right? A lot of hype around these products, particularly in the last 6 months. So for companies and for your clients, what are the real opportunities to create enterprise value from Gen AI, from LLMs? Maybe Emily, I'll come to you first.
I think that there's a few different ways that you can use generative AI sort of out of the box, right? The first is what I like to call toil work. This is the work that you need to do in order to do your real work, right? You have to sort of get this stuff out of the way, and it's usually boring, or it's usually annoying, or it's usually painful, and you need to just get it done so that you can do the thing that's actually adding value. Here, AI might be able to help you a lot. The second, of course, is with the tech industry. Actually, what we're seeing is AI is really disrupting the technology industry, because large language models are actually really good at generating code. And they're really good at producing code from text-based requirements, right? So a user story is nothing more than a text-based set of requirements and expected behaviors. And if you can translate that into code, that might get you much faster or much closer to completion much faster, right? And so you can use it for that. And then we're also seeing this in sort of the creative space. There's a website, I believe it is thesneakerdoesnotexist.com, where people are using generative AI to come up with designs for trainers.
How much of this is about just putting your company in a position where you're flexible, agile, able to respond to, if you're like a medium-sized company right now, there isn't really a huge amount of point in you maybe investing loads of time and money in setting up your own AI platform, but maybe you want to make the structural changes so that when it reaches that point in your industry, you're ready to respond.
Yeah, I think the biggest fallacy is that being agile and nimble is easy and fun. It's actually very hard work. It actually is the real work. It's a constant focus on a cycle, the feedback, and learning from it. It's a discipline. So I would say that it's a very fair question, but many companies that purport to practice Agile are actually not getting the value from it because they're not taking seriously the need to authentically grow.
Yeah, the change in mindset. And so I think it's actually not a matter of whether you're a medium-sized company or a big company, a startup. It's actually the same challenge, and it's the same playing field that we're all on. It may be that the right thing for you to do is not to start by building an AI platform. However, it may be the right thing to do to look at hosting your own open source LLM, for example, right? There's amazing solutions out there that may be as good, if not better, for your business than paying one of the AI product companies. On the other hand, some companies might actually get more benefit from simply doing that. It's going to depend very much on the access that you have to the right skill sets, the right methodology. What's actually most important about this is not about building a platform. It's not about, do you have the right data scientists or whatever. It's about, do you have the right mindset to continue to experiment and to learn from those experiments, right? So it's a feedback process that you need to create. And a lot of companies are in this sort of very fixed mindset that you do like an R&D process that comes up with an idea and then it's over. And then you take that R&D process and you move it to production and then you have a product and then it's over. And that is a very fixed mindset. And what we're trying to do with Agile is think about, actually, we need to be continuously improving. We need to ship an idea, we need to listen to the signals, we need to learn from what's happening, and then we need to improve. And so when you see companies that are really good at machine learning, even before generative AI, they were deploying models 100 times a day or more because they're able to listen to the signals, they're able to adapt and tweak the models and constantly improve. And the companies that you've seen that are struggling with AI are the ones that have the still very academic, very R&D focused, siloed mindset, and they're the ones that take 12 to 18 months to get a single model into production.
Let's talk about people. You mentioned you want to look at these things from the top down, but also from the bottom up, getting domain experts to kind of feed into the things that could maybe be done better or done more quickly by generative AI. Now, if I were a domain expert, I'd maybe bristle slightly at being asked to design an AI that I might fear could replace me. How do you manage these conversations internally? How do you do this without putting people out of work or without creating the perception that you're going to put people out of work?
Yeah, that's a really great question, and thank you for sharing it that way. I think, first of all, we wouldn't ask you to design an AI system, and we certainly wouldn't be asking you to design yourself out of your job. I think what we would ask is, what is your experience like doing your work? Which parts of your work do you like to do? Which parts do you not like to do? Where do you get stuck? Where do things not work right? How would you like them to work better? That's really just work practice research, right? Yeah. So that's kind of the frame of where we start, because what we find with high-performing teams and high-performing individuals is that they're constantly updating their repertoire, right? So it's really about finding, for you and for your colleagues in your organization, and what we start to see in many cases is there are patterns. You're not the only one that sees it that way, and it starts to bubble up into a theme. Well, okay, now then we might take it to the next level and say, okay, well, what's the value of, if we could reduce that by 15% for everyone, what would be the value back to the company, and begin to quantify. And then we're kind of beginning to build up what we would call business investments. So it's like a two-part process. You have to cull out the raw ideas, and then you have to take them to the internal venture capital to decide which ones are best to be invested for that particular company.
But could AI also help kind of push the boundaries of what I can do, augment human capability?
Yeah, absolutely. It absolutely can. I think that just being able to search a space of creativity is already a big capability boost, right? So if I'm coming up with a marketing campaign or a branding campaign, and I can search 1,000 different ideas to run by the client and pick the best 10 of those, I can do that with AI much faster than I can hire the people to do that anyways. And a lot of people might say, oh, that's going to replace human labor, but the truth is nobody's hiring a bunch of marketing designers or whatever to come up with 1,000 ideas, right? You're usually trying to target something and come up with that solution. Maybe you
right. So maybe you're a marketing consulting firm, and you're experts at bringing that kind of range in your work too. There's the opportunity for people to be proactive with it too.
Yeah. So there's a lot that you can do just by being able to search a bigger space. But then there's all sorts of creative things that you can do about optimizing and personalizing your own workflows, about personalizing the products that you're building. Imagine products that are adapting to the people that that are using them, right? So the traditional process of coming up with a product in software development usually looks something like doing a bunch of user research, gathering requirements, building some wireframes, testing them out with your users, doing a little bit of feedback like that. But at the end of the day, you launch the product and all of your users are more or less using the same product, right? We're all looking at the same Google inbox or Outlook inbox or whatever that everyone else is looking at. And that works for some people, but it's designed for the average, right? If you have a different use case, it's usually often very painful for you. And that's why we have all these different apps and software products and things like that. What if we could build products that could adapt to user behavior? What if we could, to be able to explore those spaces and listen for what our users are asking us for in a very real way, and actually be able to design those products in that way that they can adapt? That would be really, really powerful.
What about people that fear, and I suspect I know what you're going to say to this, fear that AI is going to put them out of a job? People that, and this is not a new discussion, people have been saying this about technology for, 300, 400, 500 years. But what would you say to people like that? People or companies who kind of look at this and think, well, the thing that we do can now be automated by AI, so what are we going to do?
I think it is really much about going back. A business has to grow, a business has to think about how the market is changing. It doesn't just offer the same static service forever to its clients.
I think let's set AI aside for a moment. A lot of this work can already be automated. There's a phenomenal amount of toil work. There's a phenomenal amount of sort of rote labor that's out there that could be automated right now. And there's actually nothing stopping us from doing that, and yet we're not.
Right.
So I don't necessarily know that AI is going to come in and displace people en masse. And one of the patterns that we're actually already seeing is that companies that have taken the early step to say we're going to use this AI simply to replace people are starting to pull back from those decisions.
Yes.
There was a very widely publicized case study in the US about, 3 or 4 weeks ago, where a mental health hotline was going to replace their human call center agents with ChatGPT because their human call center agents were going to unionize. So before they could unionize, they fired them all. They said, you're now going to be replaced by ChatGPT. Maybe they didn't fire all of them. I don't know the specifics. But they were looking at replacing people with AI. And within a couple of days, the AI was giving really harmful, actually dangerous advice to the people that were calling in. And so they had to roll back that decision. I think we're going to see that, right? The thing is, it's like the sort of saying, you can't save your way out of a recession. If you're only looking at AI to simply reduce your operational costs and to sort of shrink the amount that you're spending on people, you're listening to the wrong song, right? That's not where the benefit of AI is going to come. That's not where the revolution is going to come. There's only so much you can shrink your costs. What AI is really going to do to enable the business is give you new solutions, new things to work on, new areas to get into, and it's going to reduce the friction for getting into those areas. So while some people may be at risk, my prediction is that just like with other forms of automation, some industries might be affected, but we will adapt and we'll actually find new things that we can do, new things that we can build, and new solutions.
This comes back to governance as well, because at Thoughtworks we're a very strong advocate for so-called human-centered AI. So what does that mean? That means as we think about building a solution, we think about people's well-being. What does that mean? We have to make sure that people are safe, right? Because systems can harm. And thinking those things through as you're building something is just as important. If you're harming people and you're making money, that's not a very good situation.
So this is obviously a very fast-moving, fast-changing landscape. What do businesses need to understand about the forces, internal and external, that are going to shape the field of generative AI over the next few years? Maybe Emily can start.
We do know that a lot of the large language models, for example, have started to exhaust the content that they can possibly train from. So we're not really sure how much better these larger language models are going to get, because there's not that much more content that they can pull from. The future of this, I think, is going to be using open source models. It's going to be about running your own LLMs, which you can do actually for fairly cheap, and creating sort of purpose-built solutions within your own organization. That right now still requires a high barrier to entry technologically, but if you can get over that barrier, then maybe you're going to be able to fine-tune the AIs for your use cases. And so that, to me, I think is going to be the bigger sort of future factor, right? So we'll see where that sort of goes with what's the next version of ChatGPT going to look like? Is it actually going to be better, or are there risks with its quality? We have also seen sort of the risk of AI's training on AI-generated output, and there's something called model decay that shows how these algorithms start to underperform as they're trained on their own output, right? And so there needs to be this continuous, in order for these models to keep getting better, there needs to be this continuous human output, right? And that human output needs to also start to change and to vary. And I do think that we are going to see ways to sort of react to that. People are going to find ways to speak their own humanity in what they are doing, right? And language is always changing, so we're always going to find a way to do that. So I'm not really worried about like the human expression dying out. I am worried that we might get to a quality barrier with these algorithms that we might not be able to overcome anytime soon. And so we do need to have a strategy for how to make this a sustainable sort of implementation.
What about things like governance risk? I guess you don't want to plow billions of dollars into something that might get banned by the regulator in 5 years' time. How can companies kind of deal with that potential risk? How do you think about that?
What we're seeing with regulation is not so much that they're coming up with bans. I mean, the new AI Act from the European Union does ban some applications, but more importantly, what it does is create risk categories. And so if you're engaging in certain activities with AI that are of certain risk categories, there's steps that you need to take. A lot of companies are afraid of the regulation, or they believe that the regulation is going to hinder innovation. I'm not of that view. I think that you can very easily manage this risk. My own background is in research and development. I used to run clinical trials. I did medical device development. We had to manage risk in order to test any medical device on a human being, right? There are practices that you can apply to manage this, and it's not that hard. You need to have experts that know how to do it, and you need to bring them into your organization to help teach you.
Counterpoint though, when you're testing a medical device, you sort of need to have the support of the company behind you to do it, right? But these tools are so easy to use that you may have no idea that your employees are using something like ChatGPT or not. So how do you manage that risk?
Yeah, so this goes into a governance strategy, right? So you need to come up with an internal IT policy, right? And you need to be able to implement that policy. Things like auditing how you're using ChatGPT will become important for organizations. And what we like to say is make it easy to do the right thing and make it hard to do the wrong thing. You can come up with technical solutions for some of this stuff, right? Instead of opening up the ChatGPT API for everyone to use, maybe you should build a facade on top of it that helps control those inputs and helps monitor those inputs. Maybe you can build an internal tool that is able to give your employees access to those tools in a more easy way than they could just go to the website or something like that, right? So you do need to be able to monitor and to manage this usage. And of course, you need to manage the costs associated with it. You need to manage the privacy risk, the data protection risk, the copyright risk. All of those things need to be managed. You need to take a proactive step with your AI governance. So you need to, one of the things that you should be doing, regardless of whether or not you're going to jump into GenAI head first or whether you're going to just dip your toe in the waters, you need to have a governance plan, and you need to have people there that are going to help you with that process.
Yeah, one of the things we talk about quite a lot is that there's a very strong distinction between risk management and risk avoidance. And the default position for many organizations is the latter. right? So if you're going to say, oh, I'm afraid because regulation is changing, if you allow that to be the barrier, that's not going to be helpful to organizations. But taking a fine-grained approach to how you address risk so that you can safely move in an uncertain world and actually measure the outcomes and steer where you want to go from the diamonds and the minefield, that's the life that we have right now.
If I was a company using generative AI, how could I make sure that the things that the AI is generating are actually A, legal for me to use, B, factually accurate? How can I make sure of this stuff without actually employing a human to basically check all the work and redo all the work itself anyway?
You can't.
Yeah.
You need to employ a human to check the work and to validate what the outputs are. The attribution problem is actually a really difficult one for ChatGPT or similar algorithms or products to solve. You do need to have people that are going to fact check. You can't trust the outputs. You can't trust that the code that it's generating is secure. You have to have experts looking at this and giving the review. That doesn't mean that they need to spend as much time checking as they would creating. You can still get those efficiency gains, but you do have to have a practice there that's going to help you manage and mitigate those risks. The copyright question, that's a very complex question. We don't know what the answer to that is. There are lawsuits in the United States that have been filed around this, and I'm not a lawyer and I'm not a legal analyst, so I'm not going to predict what those lawsuits are going to, how those are going to conclude. What I do know is that you're already embracing this risk as an organization today.
Absolutely.
People are copying code from open source repositories. They're taking code from Stack Overflow. They're taking code from other places, for example. And you don't really have those controls. You may be as much in risk, at risk of violating copyright or IP restrictions now as you would be using ChatGPT.
We do have clients that we work with now where we are addressing those issues through risk mitigation steps.
And what would that look like? What does a risk mitigation look like in this scenario?
I think you should give more detail than I could, but we have a client in Germany where I know that all the open source code that they may pull in goes through a check.
So there are tools that you can help to check to make sure if code is coming from GPL libraries, for example. That might be something that you want to bring in. If you're coming up with text content, you might want to just search the internet for that text to see if that's appearing someplace that might be copyrighted. You can sort of come up with some of these strategies to quality control some of that. You might want to look at, so typically with risk mitigation, you look at what are the possible failures that could occur. How might those failures occur? What are the actions you would take to correct those failures? Then you can come up with ways to limit the exposure of those failures, right? So maybe don't take the code that you're generating with ChatGPT and then throw it to the entire organization. Maybe keep it limited to one context. Those are some things that you might be able to do to help manage this. If you're doing visual design with ChatGPT, there might be a different set of risks. So the best thing to do is bring in the experts and help work with each process. And once you have that stable and repeatable process, then make sure you roll it out to the organization.
We could talk about this for days, but unfortunately we've got a limited amount of time. So my last question to each of you in turn is, what does today's CXO need to know? Maybe Barton, you can go first on this.
I think from my perspective, there's kind of three underlying elements that enable. One is that an organization has to have a legitimate strategy that really looks at where value may lie for it. Then it needs to have the right technical expertise. And if you're missing either of those things, you won't be successful. And then the thing that really emerges from what we're seeing with generative AI is a focus on people, right? There is a possibility to create a workforce that is actually more productive. And we know from research that we see when people feel more comfortable in their environment, they actually do better work. So those are the three enabling factors.
Yeah. I think for me, it's to get out of the sort of sandbox, right? You're never going to eliminate all of the risk. You need to find an application area where you can start moving forward, and you need to move forward with it, right? Get out of the POC phase. Start getting things into a real working environment and start to learn by doing where the limitations are, where the pain points are, and how to actually take that forward. So I would say get out of that phase where you're just doing a lot of experimentation and using it as if it's a toy. Get into the place where it's actually part of your workflow and find the part of your organization where that's going to be a good place to start. You don't have to take the entire company at once. You don't have to create one policy that's going to apply to 100,000 employees tomorrow. That's not where you need to start. Maybe find one team that's going to be able to bring value from it. Give them the tools, bound the harm that they might be able to cause, and see what you learn. So just move forward with it. Be bold, be assertive, and make sure that you're monitoring.
And what's implicit in what Emily's saying is that to be bold and to be assertive and to do something in the real world, you've already done your homework on where the value lies, right? So pick something and take it to market and go through that feedback loop, because you'll find yourself suddenly in quite a different world than POC world.
Well, sadly, that's about all we've got time for. It's been a really, really fascinating discussion. Thank you both so much for joining us. It sounds like there's loads of opportunities out there for businesses that have the right strategy if they're willing to do the work. This has been a wired virtual briefing with Thoughtworks about generative AI and driving impact, not hype. Thank you so much for watching, and we'll see you next time.